When you think of the Old West, you probably imagine gunfights, dusty streets, and rugged cowboys. But the truth is far stranger and much harsher than the legends. From the struggle for water and the quiet corruption of lawmen to the dangerous underbelly of saloons, real life on the frontier was a mix of survival, risk, and constant change. And it's nothing like what Hollywood has shown us. Number 1. When justice was bought, not earned. You might picture the sheriff's badge as a mark of honor, but in some frontier towns, that badge was nothing more than a tool for influence. Far from the idealized image of the fearless lawman, many sheriffs were elected, or sometimes appointed, not for their integrity, but for their connections, wealth, and willingness to serve the interests of those who truly held power. In the Wild West, local control was valued above all else, and in many cases, sheriffs were chosen in public meetings or through popular votes, tying them closely to the desires and demands of the community, for better or worse. This system created ideal conditions for corruption. One notorious example is Johnny Bayan, the Cochise County Sheriff in 1881, who became infamous for taking a percentage of gambling, liquor, and prostitution revenues, earning him the nickname of Leader of the 10% Ring. He was widely seen as more aligned with outlaws than opposing them, even clashing with respected lawmen like Wyatt Earp. Other figures blurred the line between enforcing the law and breaking it. Henry Plummer of Bannock, Montana, was elected sheriff by day, but was accused of leading a road agent gang by night, robbing travelers and using his position to protect his own crimes until vigilantes hanged him. Steve Long, a deputy marshal in Wyoming, abused his authority to seize land, intimidate settlers, and even kill rivals planting weapons on the bodies to stage them as armed threats. These were not isolated incidents. They reflected a wider pattern where the badge could be a shield for criminal behavior rather than a symbol of justice. In many towns, law enforcement depended less on legal frameworks and more on who could exert the most control, either through money, manpower, or fear. Oversight was minimal, and in remote settlements, accountability was almost non-existent. The idea of centralized, regulated policing was often met with suspicion, leading to sheriffs who operated more like independent enforcers than part of an organized justice system. Not all sheriffs fit this mold. Figures like Seth Bullock of Deadwood earned reputations for integrity and fairness, proving that honest lawmen could exist in a corrupt environment. But for every Bullock, there were others who used their position as a license to act without consequence. In such a world, justice was often determined not by written law, but by who had the heaviest purse or the most willing guns at their back. Number 2. The silent war over water. In the Old West, survival hinged less on bullets and more on access to a reliable trickle of water. So every spring, seep and creek became a bargaining chip, a boundary, and sometimes a battlefield. Ranchers mapped their range around a handful of dependable water holes. Without those, grass meant nothing, because cattle will not graze far from a drink. Homesteaders learned quickly that a claim without a well was a gamble, and a dry summer could turn a promising patch into a forfeited dream. Communities built ditches by hand, borrowing ideas from Hispanic acequia traditions and Mormon cooperative projects, and they wrote their own rules before territorial legislatures caught up. First to divert water for beneficial use had the stronger claim, a practice that hardened into the frontier principle of first in time, first in right. So that doctrine clashed with older riparian notions that tied water to land along a stream, and the legal confusion created cover for sharp dealing. Barbed wire changed the game overnight, because fencing a spring effectively fenced the range, and the fence-cutting wars that flared in parts of Texas were, at their core, fights about who controlled the only reliable taps on a dry landscape. Windmills rose across the plains, hauling water from shallow aquifers, but they were expensive and needed maintenance. A broken gear in July could doom a herd as surely as a blizzard in January. Towns cited themselves by dependable flows, and when wells failed, people packed up without ceremony, leaving streets to the dust. On cattle drives, trail bosses timed each push to the next creek crossing, pacing herds so they arrived thirsty but not frantic. A miscalculation could stampede the whole operation. Sabotage happened in the margins. Rocks shoved into a rival's headgate. A ditch berm quietly cut at night. A windmill's sucker rod loosened so the pump mysteriously failed. Because a public gunfight drew lawmen, but quiet damage could tilt an entire season. Native nations, farmers, and stockmen all read the sky like a ledger, counting clouds as credit and hot winds as debt. Knowing a late monsoon or an early freeze could topple careful plans. Courthouses filled with handwritten water filings, and ditch companies formed to finance bigger works, yet enforcement still often fell to whoever showed up first with men and shovels. The West's daily rhythm planting, branding, cutting hay, hauling freight moved to the calendar of snow melt and stream flow, and the winners weren't the loudest or the quickest on the draw, but the people who secured a small, steady current and protected it through drought, dispute, and the slow grind of law catching up to reality. Number 3. Gold fever's ugly side. Gold rushes promised instant wealth but delivered a hard economy of risk, debt, and exploitation that most newcomers didn't see until they stepped off the wagon. The first arrivals might wash nuggets from stream beds with a pan, yet that brief window closed quickly as thousands poured in, and the easy pickings vanished. Tools, tents, and food sold at predatory markups because hauling freight over mountains or across deserts cost a fortune, and merchants knew desperation kept prices high. Guaranteed maps and miracle devices changed hands in back alleys, turning hope into sunk costs. Camps sprang up in ravines and on river bars where sanitation was an afterthought. Latrines were shallow, water sources were shared with livestock, and dysentery could spread faster than news of a fresh strike. Violence didn't always look like a shootout. More often, it was a night raid on a claim marker, a forged deed, or a rigged miners' meeting where a crowd shouted through property disputes before a jury could be formed. Many districts improvised their own miners' courts and rules about staking ground and posting notice, but those norms shifted with every influx of newcomers, and enforcement usually meant who had more friends or more leverage at the saloon. As individual placer deposits dwindled, capital took over. Companies bought claims, pooled investors' money, and brought in stamp mills, hydraulic monitors, and long flumes that chewed through hillsides and left rivers choked with silt. The environmental bill landed downstream farms buried in tailings, fisheries destroyed, and floods made worse by clogged channels. The people who consistently profited weren't the men ankle-deep in icy water. They were outfitters, assay officers, freighters, moneylenders, saloon keepers, boarding house owners, and yes, undertakers who never lacked for business in unstable camps. Women who set up laundries, bakeries, or rooming houses often earned steadier income than prospectors because they sold what miners could not do without: hot food, clean clothes, and a bed that wasn't a wet blanket under a tarp. Immigrant labor kept the machinery running, and the tunnels shored, yet prejudice and special taxes targeted them whenever politics needed a scapegoat. Mail delays and rumor mills fueled stampedes to every new El Dorado, leaving behind half-built shacks and maxed-out credit at the general store. For every rare pocket of ore that made a life, hundreds of men walked away with worn boots, damaged lungs, and a lesson most never put in their letters home. In a gold rush, the surest strike was owning the shovel, not swinging it. Number 4. Death came quietly. Frontier life ended less in blazing showdowns than in slow, unseen attrition, because the real killers were infection, exposure, and ordinary accidents that turned lethal without timely care. A splinter from a fence rail, a shoeing nail stepped on in the corral, or a toothache that spread to the jaw could spiral into sepsis when antiseptics were scarce, and cleanliness depended on creek water and a bar of lye soap. Midwives managed most births, and many were skilled, but they lacked antibiotics and blood transfusions. A prolonged labor, retained placenta, or postpartum fever could take a mother within days, while the household scrambled for a doctor who might be riding in from 50 miles away. Children faced their own gauntlet of hazards: measles, diphtheria, whooping cough, and diarrheal diseases that thrived where latrines sat too close to wells, and summer heat baked refuse into dust that settled on everything. Adults, meanwhile, carried chronic threats they rarely named: untreated tuberculosis in boarding houses, malaria on irrigated bottoms, pneumonia after a week of wet work in the mines, or a winter drive in sleet. Remedies reflected what people could reach, not what worked best. Laudanum quieted pain, but masked complications. Calomel purges and patent tonics promised miracles while dehydrating the very patients they claimed to save. Chloroform and ether were known, yet not always available or trusted, and amputation remained a grim fallback when a compound fracture or gangrene outpaced the tools on hand. Work itself was unforgiving. A ranch hand thrown under a wagon, a teamster pinned by a load, a logger crushed under a misjudged cut, a miner caught in a bad set of timbers. These were quick deaths or slow ones, depending on who found them and how far from help they fell. Weather finished what injury began. A rider stranded in a whiteout could freeze within sight of home. A prospector miles from shade could collapse from heat and never rise. Even food and water carried risk. A winter of salt pork and flour left some crews with scurvy. Runoff turned clear streams into carriers of typhoid after spring thaws. Communities adapted as best they could. Quarantines nailed to doorframes. Church basements turned into sick rooms. Traveling doctors paid in beef or cordwood. But the graveyards grew with the towns. Headboards leaned in every wind-swept cemetery. A ledger of ordinary lives cut short, not by legend, but by the thousand small ways a place without modern medicine could quietly take a body down. Number 5. The real cowboy clock. Before the sun thought about coming up, the outfit was already moving. The cook coaxing a fire to life, coffee boiling hard, the night guard easing the herd back to calm after hours of circling in the dark. A typical drive ran on a strict rhythm, because cattle responded to consistency. Men rolled out around 3 or 4, gulped beans and biscuits, and roped fresh mounts from the remuda, a rotating string of horses, so each rider could switch animals through the day. Jobs were set by position. Point riders kept the nose of the herd aimed right. Swing and flank riders caught drifts, and the poor souls on drag coughed through dust all day to push stragglers forward. A competent trail boss balanced speed against condition. 10 to 15 miles was a normal day with 2 or 3 waterings. More if grass ran thin, less if a river crossing or rough country slowed everything. River work was its own calculus-testing bottom, picking a safe entry and staggering the push so cattle didn't pile up and drown. In winds or lightning, the herd could stampede at the sound of a snapped twig, and men sang or talked to keep a steady human presence that soothed nervous stock. The pay hardly matched the risk. Ordinary hands earned a monthly wage that barely covered gear. The cook was paid more because no one wanted to lose him, and the boss earned the premium for decisions that could save or sink the drive. Most riders were young. Many were Mexican vaqueros, whose techniques shaped roping and horsemanship across the plains. A significant number were black cowboys, who handled the same brutal work for the same meager pay, and native hands rode for ranches near their homelands. Skill mattered more than birth. A steady seat and good judgment got you hired. Tools were practical and few. A slicker rolled in the bedroll, because any storm could last for days. A kerchief for grit and sun, a broad hat for shade and rain, rawhide or grass rope depending on style, and a saddle built to live in for 16 hours straight. As seasons turned, work shifted from long drives to spring roundups and full cuts branding calves, sorting beeves for market, doctoring animals with crude but effective methods for screw worms or hoof rot. On trail, food came from the chuck wagon, an innovation that turned a freight wagon into a mobile kitchen and workshop. Staples were flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, dried fruit, and sourdough starter kept alive in a warm place. When luck allowed, the cook added fresh meat, wild onions, or canned tomatoes. Water quality shaped everything. Good camps were chosen for grass, wood, and clean flow. Bad water meant sick cattle and sick men. Night never guaranteed rest. Guards rotated every couple of hours, riding slow circles and calling out to one another so the herd heard familiar voices. Bedrolls were spread on bare ground. Tents were dead weight unless weather forced them. Firearms rarely left their scabbards except for snakes or wolves. The real defense was horsemanship and keeping cattle quiet. Accidents were constant. A horse falling in a prairie dog hole, A rope burn that took skin to the bone. A crossing gone wrong. Dust raised on drag irritated eyes and lungs. Rain chilled riders to the core, even in summer. Despite the grind, many kept at it for the pride of doing a job that demanded judgment few possessed. The work began to change when railheads marched south, and barbed wire fenced water and grass, pinching off the open range. Brutal winters finished what economics started, and ranching shifted toward fenced pastures and shorter drives. But while it lasted, the clock was simple and relentless. Up before dawn, move cattle at a workable pace, guard them until midnight, snatch sleep, then do it again. Measuring progress in creek crossings and hoofbeats rather than hours on a watch. Number 6. The saloons no one talks about. Not every bar on the frontier was a clattering piano and a staged brawl. Many were discreet, segmented, and governed by quiet rules that told you who belonged and who didn't the moment you crossed the threshold. In railroad towns, a respectable front room might serve oysters or steaks, while a curtained side door led to a private gambling layout faro boxes on one table, stud or draw on another, where house dealers worked with lookouts and trusted changemen, and where regulars played on tabs tracked in pencil on the back of a cigar box lid. Smaller settlements tucked their bars into the rear of hardware stores, behind barber chairs, or beneath boarding houses to dodge licensing fees and Sunday closing rules. Locals called them blind pigs, or simply the back, and you needed an introduction to get poured after hours. Money circulated in odd ways. Some places issued drink tokens or scrip to steady customers, tying them to the house. Others ran free lunch counters heavy on salt ham, pickles, cheese, to drive thirst and keep stools filled. The most dangerous rooms were the calm ones, where the loudest sound was cards snapping on felt. A nod could bring a stake from the safe. A raised eyebrow could freeze a dispute without raising a voice, and a stranger who watched too closely found a shoulder suddenly in his line of sight. Town ordinances added another layer. Many cattle hubs required visitors to check their revolvers with the city marshal or at the bar. Signs did the talking. Leave your guns here. And the barkeep's word carried more weight than any posted notice. The rules were less about morality than risk management. No guns on the floor, settle debts at the cage, no throwing glasses, and if you had business, take it to the back office where the owner, a freight agent, or a cattle buyer could close a deal away from eyes and ears. Saloons doubled as hiring halls, mail drops, and information exchanges. Trail bosses posted chalk lists for hands, freighters asked after wagon parts, and riders compared water on the next stretch as if it were the weather report. In districts with reform-minded councils or strong church committees, saloons adapted rather than disappeared, moving just outside town limits, opening as clubs with dues, or splitting functions so the front sold soda and the rear sold whiskey by the glass to members only. Ethnic lines shaped the map as well. Cantinas served vaqueros with mezcal and guitars. German beer halls emphasized drafts and orderly tables, and Chinese merchants ran tea and grocer counters that quietly moved imported liquors to known faces. Games shifted with fashion and law. Faro dominated because it was fast and simple, but crooked layouts, sprung boxes, marked decks, coolers slipped in by a partner meant the house took the edge unless a gambler arrived with his own dealer or demanded a square game under watch. Poker gained prestige as professional road gamblers used skill to counter the house advantage, while wheel games and chuck-a-luck offered quick action to cowhands with a month's pay, burning a hole in their vest. Behind the commerce ran a security apparatus few noticed. Doormen who knew the ranch brands and the rail agents by sight, bottlemen who kept track of which table was running hot, and runners who hurried to fetch the city marshal before a problem sprouted legs. Violence, when it came, was short and specific, more a matter of credit gone bad, or pride bruised at a high-stakes table than the theatrical melees popular fiction loves. Most nights ended with a lamp turned low, chairs on tables, and a ledger balanced to the penny, because the margins were thin and the risks were many. Raids by temperance officers, sudden tax inspections, winter slumps when freight froze and cattle money ran late. What these quiet saloons did best was convert uncertainty into routine. Steady pours, steady games, steady information. And in a region built on boom and bust, that predictability was the true commodity for sale.